In this video, we're going to create this rock shape. So let's get started by creating a new package. So here I'm going to go to File, New Substance, and for the template, we're just going to start with this physically based metal rough template. And for the graph name, I'm just going to call this rock_ground. And so now that I have this set up, I'll just click OK, and I've now created my new substance package. Now, as I discussed in the first chapter, for optimizing a substance, I like to keep the materials or the graphs that I'm going to use in Engine here at the top. So what I'm going to do now is create myself a new folder. And so we have this folder, and let's rename this to Utilities. And within this Utilities folder is where I'm actually going to create my rock shape graph. So here I'll just right click my substance package, go to New, Graph. We're going to use the same template for graph name. Let's just call this rock_shape. And so here I'll click OK, and now we have our rock shape graph. I can just left click, drag and drop, and place this rock shape graph here into this utilities folder. So now let's double click the rock shape graph, and we're ready to start working. For the output computation of this graph, I'm going to set this to no. Again, as I discussed in Chapter 1 in the optimization video, I don't want this graph to be available to me in my engine. I'm going to use it and instance it within other graphs. So I'm setting this output computation here to no. Also, for the outputs that we created, let's just select all these and we're going to delete them because we're only going to utilize one specific output, and that's a height. So here I'm going to hit the space bar to open up my operational nodes, and I'm going to use this search field to start to type in output. And so here I have an output node. I'll just left click it to create it. And for the usage, I'm going to set this item here to height. And for the identifier name, let's just label this as height, and let's actually put a label, and again we'll just call this height. So this specific graph is only going to output height information, and like I said, we're going to use this in other graphs. We're going to want to be able to kind of see here in our 3D view what this height information is we're working with. For our material here in the 3D view, I'll come up to Material, Default. You can see that I'm going to use the physically based metal rough. Now we have the option for parallax occlusion or tessellation. I am working with height information, however I'm not going to utilize this tessellation shader. Instead, I'm going to use parallax occlusion because that is the type of effect I'm going to be working with in Engine. So I want to just be able to accurately see what type of effect I'm going to be creating with this parallax occlusion shader. So let's just use this. Now, like I said though, we only have this one output, so we need to be able to see what we're doing here in our 3D view. So a way to set this up, I'm going to hit the space bar again, and I'm going to start to type in base, and that'll get me over here to my base material. So I'm going to select this material here, and for the material preset, I'm just going to set this at dielectric, and I'm going to take my roughness value up pretty high, and I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to enable a couple user-defined maps, my normal and my height. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take our height information, we're going to convert it to normal and feed it into this normal map, and then we're also going to take that same height information and feed it into the height. And then we're going to use this base material node. We're going to view this in our 3D view. And this, again, this is just a temporary solution so that we can see, the results of the node network we're creating here for our height. Okay, so let's start creating our shape. So here I'm going to hit the space bar, and I'm going to start with this polygon node. So here I'm going to search for polygon, and you see that we have two options. I'm going to go with this polygon 2. You'll notice that I use the space bar to open up the operational nodes, and I search for nodes often. This is just a quick way to work. However, all these nodes are also available here within your library. So if you're not really familiar with all the nodes, you can use the library here. So for instance, under generators, patterns, and we just scroll through here, we'll find this polygon 2 node that I'm working with. You also have a search field here as well that you can utilize to find specific nodes. Here we have our polygon 2 node, and for the sides I'm going to set this to 5, and for the curve I'm just going to increase this a little bit, and you can see that it just kind of rounds out these edges. And for the gradient, I'm going to drop this value down just a bit, and that's just going to kind of flatten out this top part here. So this is the shape that we have to start with. So next, I am going to add in a noise. So here I'll just start to type in perlin, and I'm going to utilize this perlin noise 1. So now that I have this noise, I'm going to blend these two guys together. So let's hit the space bar, and let's grab our blend node. So let's start to connect these. So the polygon 2 node here will go into our foreground, and then we'll take our background here and plug this into our noise. So now that we have this in place, I'll double click to view the blend node's parameters, and we're going to set the blending mode here to add sub. And so what this does is it allows us to modulate this shape here based on this noise to kind of give us this edge pattern here. And this is going to be the basic foundation here for our rock shape. So something else that we can do here is I'm going to select this node, and with this node selected, I'll hit the space bar, and I'm going to start to type in my transform to get to my transform 2D node, and we'll just left click here to insert this node. Now I want to view this node's properties, but I want to actually see the output of this node in my 2D view. So I have this node selected, lets me see the parameters. I'll double click, and when I do this, it views this node here into my 2D view. Well, I can go back to this node and just do a simple single left click to view its properties while I'm viewing the output of this blend. So now that I have this in place, what I'm going to be able to do is hook up a user parameter to this transform node to adjust the rotation. And let's see what this does. So if I start to adjust the rotate here of this transform node, you can see that I can change the shape of my rock. And so we'll use this, like I said, as a user input parameter. So for now, let me just kind of undo that rotation, and we're going to leave it like this to start. So now that we have the basic foundation here for our shape, I'd like to add a set of nodes that's going to allow me to trim this shape. So instead of having like a whole shape like this, I can actually cut edges off and things like that. And so now let's create that node network. So here I'm going to start by creating a gradient. So I'll hit the space bar, and I'll start to type in gradient. And I have these options here. I'm going to use this gradient linear 1. So that creates this node here for me. All right, and so I would like to be able to transform this node. So again, we're going to need a transform. So here, let's hit the space bar. We'll grab our transform node, and we'll add this guy in. So just like I showed here with the noise, we're going to be able to rotate this linear shape using this transform node. All right, so now that we have this gradient, we need to be able to manipulate or scan through the values of this gradient. And there's a really good node for doing this, and that's called the histogram scan. So here I have my transform node selected. I'm going to hit the space bar, and I'll start to type in histo, and you can see that we have this histogram scan node. So by default, with the position and contrast at 0, you can see that we're getting full black. So here's what happens when I start to just increase my position value. You can see that it's just scanning through the values of that linear gradient. And when I set this all the way basically to 1, I can make this full white. And at 0, I can make this full black. So this is going to give me like a range where I can basically turn this effect on and off. And then here you can see that I'm able just to kind of scan through these values. Something else that's really cool about this is that I can increase my contrast here. So notice that we have this nice kind of feather here within these transitional values, but if I increase my contrast, we can make this more of a sharp transition. And now when I start to move my positional values, you can see the type of effect that we get here. So let's just set it something like this for now. And what I'm going to do is utilize this gradient to basically cut in or trim this shape. So here I'll hit the space bar again, and let's grab a blend node. And let's just connect our gradient here to the foreground and our shape here to the background. And so for the blending mode, I'm going to set this to min darken. And so here is the effect that I get. Let's go back over here to our histogram scan and take a look. So now if I start to move my position, you can see that here at a value of 1, I get my full shape. And as I start to decrease this value, I'm basically kind of cutting in to our shape to get kind of this nice slope transitional fall off to our rock shape. And this is going to allow me to create, variation to the rocks. Again, I can use my contrast tool here to change the size of that slope. So for instance, I might use a value like this. And so now I've got this kind of nice slope. The top part of the rock is going to be here in this white area, and you can see that it's going to kind of slope off in this transition. Also, if I go back now to my transform node, I'm going to utilize this to create a user input parameter so that I can adjust the rotation of this. So this is going to give me a lot of flexibility when I'm creating or using variations to my shapes here for my rocks. So again, let's just undo this so we can kind of get everything back to that default. And let's come over here to our histogram scan, and let's just set this guy to full white. So again, these guys are here, our trim tool and our transform tool. We're not going to use them just yet. In the very end here, we're going to hook these up as user parameters. So now we need to start to vary this shape up. So let's do that by utilizing a slope blur. So I'm going to hit the space bar and I'm going to start to do a search here for slope blur, and we're going to use this slope blur grayscale node. And so this is going to take a grayscale and a slope input. For the grayscale, we're going to use our shape. So now we actually need a slope input. And so for that, I'm going to come over here to my noises and I'm going to utilize a noise. And what I'm actually looking for, and I can just search for it very quickly here, is fractal sum base. So we'll use this node. Now this node has some parameters that we can use. So here I'm going to start to just kind of adjust some of these parameters here to get kind of the effect that I'm looking for. So let's just start with something like this. And I'm going to take this fractal sum base and again plug this here into my slope. Let's double click our slope blur and take a look at the shape that we're getting. So for our samples, we need to make sure that we put this all the way up to 32 so that we get the appropriate quality that we need. And like I said, we can go back here to this fractal sum base and we can adjust its values as well to get the type of effect that we're looking for. So here I'm just making a few tweaks to see what type of values I want to work with. And this is pretty subjective here in this case. Here I also have this large kind of white kind of flat spot here, and if I just move back over to my polygon node, I can actually start to change this by just dropping down here or increasing my gradient sum. So I'm just going to increase my gradient value here just so that I can get a little bit more kind of gray values in this area and keep this kind of flat plateaued area not as large as it was before. So here we get kind of these, again, these rock shaped kind of lines and hard edges here. And so now that we have this, we need to basically kind of cap this shape so that it's still kind of fitting here within the shape that we've been working with thus far, like our main kind of rock base shape. So what I'm going to do here is just add another blend node, and I'm going to grab our original shape. This is again before we use the slope blur, and I'm going to plug this here into the foreground. And now let's take kind of our augmented shape here and let's plug this into the background. And we'll double click this node and we're going to change the blending mode here to multiply. So this just kind of caps this value down a bit. So here's what we had, and now we get this. Here, actually, I'm going to go back over to my polygon node here, and I'm just going to make a change here to this gradient shape for now. Well, no, actually, let's keep it like this here. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to come over to this node, and I need to basically readjust these values because the clamping is just a bit too intense. So with this node selected, I'm going to do a search here, and I'm going to grab a levels node. And with this level node selected, I'm going to start to just do a gamma operation here. So here you can see that we're losing a lot of detail in here. And so I'm just going to just change the gamma here to kind of bring back some of these values. And so now you can see that we get some nice kind of sloping values. We still get a lot of these hard edges here we want for our rock. And we kind of fill out this shape here. So we still get our main rock shape, but now we have a lot of this nice hard edges that were created here by utilizing this slope blur. Again, if we just come back over here to our polygon node and we start to work with this gradient value, you can see that we can utilize this as well to kind of change some of this. So basically what I mean here is change some of the overall kind of surface area to this flat plateaued spot. So here on our gradient, let's just start to decrease this value. You can see where we just start to expand this a bit. So like I said, I want to just keep this maybe closer to around maybe 0.9 or so. Now let's go back to our levels, and here I feel like I'm losing just a little bit in here, so I'm just going to kind of flatten these out by just changing my gamma value or dropping this down. Now we start to get this shape that's starting to have more of a rock-like appearance. So I'm liking the shape that we have thus far, but I'd still like to kind of vary this a bit more. So like right now we have like this kind of larger flat area, and then everything is just kind of sloping down. So like I said, let's just vary this a bit more. So here, let me just make a little bit more room here for my nodes. And so now we're going to add in this plasma noise. So here I'll hit the space bar and I'll start to search for this guy. Here it is, the plasma node. And these kind of dark values here, I'm going to use these transitional areas from dark to light to kind of help me to kind of vary the kind of like some peaks and valleys here on my rock shape. And so the idea when you're creating a material like this is when you're going through the noises, you just kind of think about, you know, what type of shapes you're trying to create. Like I said here, this is all pretty uniform. We got this real flat spot. What I'd like to do is maybe have some areas that are maybe white here, maybe introduce a little bit of a dark area. So for the height information, that kind of just pushes down into the rock shape. And you can see that, you know, we kind of have something like this going here. We've got some, you know, high kind of peak, and it kind of slopes down into these kind of dark, you know, recessed areas. So again, I'm just thinking about the type of effect, and then what I do is I just run over here into the library and check out my noises, and I try to find a noise that maybe will kind of give me that type of effect. And then I just kind of play with the noise to see if I can make that work for me. So now that we have this in place, we need to add it to basically the flow that we have here within our graph, and we're going to do that here with a blend node. So let's take our plasma, connect it to the foreground. Here, I'll zoom in so we can really see what we're doing here. Let's take our levels, plug this into the background. Now, like I said, I want to have kind of these dark areas. I want them to kind of push down into the surface. So what we're going to do is set our blending mode here to subtract. And so when I do that, it's really eroding away down into our shape. But I can start to see that, well, it's kind of given me an idea of what I want to work with. So I noticed that, you know, this white kind of line edge here, I'm starting to get kind of like that peak that I want, and it's kind of, you know, giving me kind of a darker value here, which means I'm starting to kind of create like a little bit of a valley. So I'm getting that variation, but it's just really intense right now. So what I want to do is just kind of modulate these values. So here I'm going to just select this wire. So I can either select the node, or if I want to insert a node in between two nodes that already exist, I would do that by just selecting the wire here. And then here on my toolbar, since I can see it, here's level, I'm just going to just click this button here to add a levels in between that. So here, let's double click this blend node operation so we can see that here in our 2D view. Let's select our levels, and let's just start to play around with the values. So here I'm going to take my output white, and I'm going to start to just bring this guy down. Now you can see this is starting to bring back some of that value that this subtract operation just obliterated. So we're just bringing that back. So we'll bring this back here. We still get, you know, some white kind of areas in here that I want to keep. So let's just adjust our gamma just a little bit. So I just soften that. So here you can see that I get more of like, you know, this kind of edge here, and it kind of dips down into this little valley here. Here I've got an edge, and then we slope down here. So all I've done here was I've taken, again, this kind of uniform kind of plateaued spot, and we've just varied it so it's not just this big flat uniform area. And if we wanted to, we could probably come in and start to vary this even more. So just as an experiment, let's hit the space bar here. I'm going to grab a warp. Now, as I mentioned in the first video in optimization, warps are, you know, pretty intense operations, so we may or may not want to do this, but let's just give it a try here. So let me just grab this warp and plug it in here. And again, kind of going with the idea of optimization, let's just kind of reuse some nodes we already have. So here I'm just going to reuse this Perlin noise. Let's plug this guy in. Let's come over to our intensity, and let's just increase this intensity. A really high value, that's way too much, so here we'll just kind of back it down. So here it is without any warping, and here it is with some warping. Then let's just plug this into our levels and see what type of effect this gets us. So here you can see that we start to just get, I think I like this better. This just gives me, a bit more variation here to what we had before. So again, here's what we had. We're getting the effect, but again, pretty uniform. And so here we've just kind of subtracted in with these dark areas from this plasma to vary this overall height. Let's go back to this levels, and let me just tweak this gamma a little bit. Maybe come in here to this warp. Here, double click, single click to view the warp, and let's just see what we kind of get with this value here. Yeah, maybe something like that. So yeah, here in this case, I think I am just going to use the warp. I kind of like what this is doing for me here in terms of variation. So at this stage, we have our basic overall rock shape. And now I'm going to add in some kind of secondary noise to this. But to do that, we're actually going to start to view this here on our actual 3D view. So let's see what we have so far. So like I mentioned, we have our base node that we're going to utilize for this. So I'm going to take my height and just plug this here into my height input. And I also need to make a normal map for this. So here, let me hit the space bar, and I'll start to type in normal. And we have this normal node. Let's add this guy in, and let's take the height and convert it to normal information. So if we just hit this button here to remove the transparency, you can see here's the normal. And I'm just to increase here my intensity. So let's take it up to something like maybe 7. So now here's the normal information that we have. And let's take this and plug it into our base node as well. And so here we have our base node. And like I said, this is just a temporary node that we're going to use so that we can view, what we're working on here in our 3D view. So I'm going to right click this node, and instead of saying view outputs in 3D view, I'm just going to say view in 3D view. So I'll use this, and then boom, here you can see that we start to get our rock shape here in our 3D view. Now if we take a look at our material, let's go to materials, default, edit, and then here on my material height, I actually have a scale setting already in place here for this. So by default, this is going to be set to 0. So this means we're not using any parallax information. So you need to actually come over here to the height and increase this here to get that parallax effect. So like I said, we're not using tessellation for this because once we get over into our game engine, we actually want to be utilizing the parallax effect within the shader. So I just want to mimic this workflow here within Substance Designer. So here's the overall rock shape that we get. Now something else I just want to mention with this, so when you're utilizing this height as a parallax effect here within this material, you have to feed in some normal information or this won't work. So let's just say that I didn't want to use the normal at all and I was just feeding in height and I'm adjusting the scale. So if you ever get in that situation and you're adjusting scale and it looks like nothing is happening at all, you have to have a normal map in place. The overall height parallax effect is just giving us just a little bit of a hint of some depth. Again, it's more of a trick, and the details coming from our normal map. So here's what we get thus far, and I'm happy with how this rock shape is kind of working out for us. So like I said, what we're going to want to do now is start to just add in some just secondary noise to this. So here I'm going to come over to my library and I already have my noises selected, and sure enough, here's my black and white spots 3. This is the noise I wanted to use. So let's just left click, drag and drop, and place this guy in here. So as you can see with Designer, there's all these different ways to work. How we might use the library. I'm just used to Designer, so I know the nodes I want to use often, and for me it's very quick just to hit spacebar and search these guys out here. So I utilize that way, or again, you could also just utilize the node bar here. The operational nodes that you see in the spacebar menu are placed across here, so you can use that as well. So here we have this node here. This is our noise. Let's hit the spacebar. Let's add a blend. And we're going to hook these guys up. So we're going to place this noise here in the foreground. Let's take our shape, put it in the background, double click the blend node to view it here in our 2D view, and of course we need to change our blending mode. We're going to set this to multiply. So right off the bat, this is way too intense. Now one thing we could do is we could adjust opacity to this so we get something like this. Let's go ahead and just start to output these nodes now. So we'll put this here into our normal, and we'll put this here into our height. And let's take a look at what we have thus far. So here you can see, just a little bit of secondary noise on top of that kind of rock shape. Again, this is still too intense for what I want to do. And I don't actually want to have to rely on this opacity here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the opacity up to 1. And I'm actually going to take this guy here and I'm going to switch this to subtract. And then I'm going to take this noise here and I'm going to insert a levels. And I'm just going to invert the value. So here's my black and white. Let's just invert this really quick. So I'm just swapping here my black and white, my output black and white, to get something like this. Now let's take the output black and let's just drop this value down here. So now I'm kind of getting the same effect here by just dropping that opacity, but now I'm just doing it here as part of the levels instead of dropping opacity here with all my foreground and background input of my blend. So now that we have this, I still think it's pretty uniform. I don't really want to work with the value like this. So now that I have that in place, let's just start to increase basically our input black, and then let's drop back our gamma value here. So now I'm just kind of flattening some of these areas out, and now I'm going to take my output black and just move it in just to kind of minimize that overall effect that you see here. Again, all I'm doing here with this levels command is I'm just just remapping the values so that it's just going to give me the type of effect that I want to get. And so now I'm pulling in my input white so that I can just kind of flatten out some of these areas so it's a little bit smoother. And then here, we get some kind of, detail here into our rock. We get some kind of pit areas like you see here, and then some of it's kind of smoother in different areas. So, again, it's just all about variation, and this is the type of variation, I'm just kind of looking to create here with this. And now, if I wanted to, I could come back over here to this opacity, and now this opacity can be used as kind of like a feather slider. So if I start to just kind of drop this opacity, I just kind of lessen the effect even more. So let's just do something like this here. So maybe I'll just drop the opacity down just a bit more like this. So now that we have our rock shape, we're going to start to create our user input parameters. So let's start here by this first transform I mentioned earlier in the video that's going to allow us to change the overall kind of shape of our rock. So what I'm going to do here is, like I said, I want to be able to adjust the rotation here for this transform matrix. And if you take a look, we can't just go in and expose just this rotation value. We have to basically expose this entire parameter here as a matrix. However, there's an easy way to kind of work with this. So here I'm just going to double click a blank spot here in my graph to get to the root level, and I'm going to click this plus button here to create an input parameter. And for the identifier, let's just call this shape underscore rotation. And the type is going to be a float 1, and instead of a slider, we're going to change this to angle. So this is going to give us an angle controller. And so now let's go back over to this transform, and let's click our graph button here, and let's create an empty function for this. So now that I've done that, let's edit the function by just clicking the button once more. And so now we can edit this. First, we need to get that float value that we created. So I'm going to hit the space bar, and I'm going to start to type in get, and then here you can see that we have a get float option. So let's use this. Let's come over to the drop down and choose shape rotation. This is the variable that we just created. So here in the graph, I'm going to scroll down to the section here where we have functions. And here we have a function underneath the transform category, and there's several in here that apply to the matrix of the transform. One of which is called the rotation matrix, and this is very handy to work with the rotation parameter of that transform matrix. So here I'll just left click, drag and drop an instance of this function here into my function graph. And let's take our rotation float value and hook rotation input parameter. Then we'll take the rotation matrix, and we're going to set this here as the output node. So we'll right click, set as output node, and now we have that control enabled. Let's go back to our graph, double click again to get to the root level, and here's our control. Now I can click this little button here, which is going to put me in preview mode, and this gives me an idea of what this controller is going to look like. So now when I start to just change my rotation, you can see that I have this nice interactive angle control here for changing the overall shape here of my rock. So now that we have that in place, we need to start to work with our trim control. So here I'm going to scroll up towards the top, and here are the 3 nodes that set up our trim. Now here we have a transform, and so we want to be able to rotate that. So this is going to be the same setup that we just did here for our shape rotation. So here I'm going to click the plus button once more, and here I'll call this trim underscore rotation. Float 1, and for the editor we're going to use an angle once more. Now for the trim controls, I'm going to have 3 different controls, one for rotation, one for position, and one for contrast. And I'd like to group all of these together. So here for group, I'm going to set up a group called trim, and since this is just rotation for the label, I'm going to call this rotation. So now that we have this set up, let's come over to our transform. Let's create an empty function for the matrix. Let's click this edit function button. Let's grab our rotation matrix, and let's get our float again. So get float. Let's go to our drop down, and this time we're going to choose trim rotation. And then let's hook up the float to the rotation matrix, and then finally we need to set it as output. So now we have this set up in place. Now, the thing that we need to work on next here is our actual histogram controls for position and contrast. Now, these are the actual parameters that we want to work with, so I can just expose these directly. So here we'll click our button, and we'll choose to just expose. Now, for the input name, I'm going to set a custom name, so I'll go to New, and this here is going to be trim underscore position. And we'll click OK to set that name. And the input name, notice again it's set to that trim position that I just created, so we're good. Let's click OK to that. Now you can see that we've exposed this parameter to the root level of the graph. Let's do the same thing with contrast. So we'll click the button, we'll expose, and we're going to give it a new name. And here we'll just call this trim underscore contrast. Click OK to set the name, and then click OK once more to set the name to the input name. And so now that value has been exposed. Let's double click to go to the root of our graph, and let's edit here our group name. So here we want this to be trim, so we're going to set this to trim, and for the label, so it's going to be kind of like the friendly name that you see when you instance this substance into a graph or you use it inside of your engine. So here we'll just call this position. And here's contrast, same thing. Group is going to be trim, and the friendly label name will just be rotation. Now we can order these as well. So let's just say that I want to put position first. So I'm just going to just left click, drag it above, and actually I set rotation twice here, it looks like. I meant to say contrast here. Alright, so let's take our contrast and place it directly under position. So the way I want this to read is position, contrast, and rotation. Alright, so let's just zoom out and go to basically kind of the end of our chain here, or our node network, and let's test our parameters. So I'll double click to go up to the root level, and I'm going to click my preview button. Here's my shape rotation, but notice I have my nice trim group. I drop this down, and now I have controls for my position and contrast. So here, let's just start to drop our trim position, and now our contrast is set all the way, very low, so we aren't seeing much of an effect. So here, let's start to just introduce a little bit of contrast there to that value. And here you can see we're just starting to kind of eat away here at that corner. Let's pull this value up a little bit more, and so here's what we're kind of getting. We can also rotate this guy as well. Now one thing I'm noticing here with this is this edge here is very it's very sharp, and I don't really like that. So I think what I would like to do here, if we go back, that contrast here, we should actually, let me just preview my controls again. Let's go back to this contrast and just kind of drop this. I want to kind of test with a range like this. So we're not really, the way this is kind of ordered here in our graph, I don't think we're really seeing the effect like I want. So let's do this. Let's try to just reorder where this trim is taking place. So I'm just going to kind of move some of these nodes down, and let me just try something different here. So this blend, let's just take this out of the graph for now. So I'm going to grab hold of this first shape, and I'm just going to kind of overwrite or just kind of hook this in. So I'm just changing the flow of my graph, and basically I've just kind of taken out the trim control. Let's select this connection node, and I'm just going to hit backspace to remove it. So now I can grab these nodes here and we can reorder these. So let's just see what happens here if we just move it a little further down the chain here of our nodes. Let's try placing it maybe here instead. So here I'm going to take this levels node, and let's plug this into here, and then let's take the output and plug it into here where we're starting to work with that plasma noise. And so here you can see that we start to see the effect a bit better. So let's double click to go out to our graph, let's preview, and let's take a look at some of our trim controls and see what we got if we start to mess with our contrast. So there, I kind of flatten out the contrast somewhat. And I'm just kind of experimenting here to see what happens. Just increasing my contrast. And this is kind of more of what I was kind of looking at here. So notice that we're getting kind of like this slope here for the actual for this actual trim. Let's increase the amount here a bit. Yeah, here we go. So yeah, just testing here, and I can start to rotate. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah, I think that just reordering that kind of trim set of nodes here is going to give us the it's giving me a little bit better of the effect that I'm looking for. So if I just drop my contrast down, or I'm sorry, increase my contrast, I can kind of get more of that harder edge I was looking at. Okay, so yeah, I think that's going to work for me. Let's just reset our controls here. So for the position, I'm going to set this all the way to 1. And for the contrast, I'll just leave it at, maybe 0.5. And for my rotation, I'm going to set this all the way to 0. So basically, I'm just kind of resetting these values. And now, when I turn this preview mode off, I get an option, do I want to apply these values here as the defaults? And I do want to do that. So we'll click yes. And now our variables are set up. So here, the last thing we're going to do, let's just get rid of our normal and our base color node. And let's just grab that height that we had, and let's just plug this guy in here. And so in the end, like I said, we're outputting a height node, and we've given ourselves some controls so that when we actually instance this rock shape, we can use this single graph to get, multiple variations of different rocks. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at compositing this shape to create an overall rock face material.